Okay, so now that I've attacked this prompt and I've deconstructed it, I know that I'm looking for the author's central ideas about self-discipline, the individual as it relates to the community, and the good life. So those are three things that I can focus on in terms of developing a central idea. Now, I have not actually read over these stories in advance, so I'm going to be kind of cold reading them just the way that you would on the O.C. Writes. So I need to set a purpose before I go to my first passage here from where I lived and what I lived for. So I've kind of already done that. I know that I'm looking for central ideas about self-discipline. I'm looking for ideas about how the individual relates to the community, and I'm looking for ideas about the good life. Okay? So the biggest thing that I want to emphasize in terms of reading the first passage is setting that purpose and then marking the text. These things are designed for you to write on them, so we are going to write on them. All right, so this first paragraph. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms, and, if it proved to be mean, why then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world, or if it were sublime, to know it by experience and be able to give true account of it in my next excursion. For most men, it appears to me, are in strange uncertainty about it, whether it is the devil or of God, and have somewhat hastily concluded that it is the chief end of man, here to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Now, that is a dense paragraph, and from what I know about Henry David Thoreau, he's a dense guy. So let's try to figure out some of the stuff that's going on here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read through this one more time, just kind of scan through, and I'm going to underline critical things that I think could be useful to me. So I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, right? That could be important. I might be able to use that. To front only the essential facts of life. I saw that quote about 1 million times. And see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. So I'm curious as to what he thinks not life is. Living is so dear, nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. You know, this part right here, nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was not quite necessary, or quite necessary. I don't really understand that. So I'm actually going to put myself a little question mark right there because I don't quite get it. And, you know, I'm just going to keep moving on because I don't want to spend too much time on that. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. That's gross. To live so sturdily and Spartan-like. I like that, right? And there's actually a little footnote here I'm seeing, so I might want to check that out here in a minute. As to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. I really actually kind of like this part where he says, drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. So he's being very aggressive in the way that he's talking about life. And if it proved to be mean, there's this whole thing where he talks about meanness versus sublimeness. Now, mean means he's talking about life being mean in terms of being hard, right? And sublime would be life being joyous and fun and great. So if I know, right, that I'm comparing and contrasting, these two things become very important to me, whether life is mean or sublime. So I'm glad that I found this part because it's kind of critical for me to pay attention to that, right? For most men, it appears to me, are in strange uncertainty about it, whether it is of the devil or of God, and have somewhat hastily concluded that it is chief end of man, here to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Now, I got to be honest with you, I don't really follow where Thoreau goes here. because he just out of nowhere starts talking about God. So I'm going to underline this and again put a little question mark there for myself, but not get too tangled up in it because it might become clear in these later paragraphs, right? So what I want to do and what I want to advise you to do as you're reading this is put a little summary. This is what I tell all my students to do. Next to the paragraph, I want you to put a summary, a short summary of what this paragraph is about. Now, he basically is saying he's going to set a purpose for himself to live, to figure out if life is mean or if it's sublime. So what I'm going to do is over here, and this is, again, what I tell my kids, put a little hashtag sign, right, and do a one-word, basically hashtag for that paragraph. And the one that comes to my mind off the top of my head is YOLO, right? That's basically what I think Thoreau is saying here is YOLO. You only live once, so I'm going to do it right. Okay? Now, he says, "Still we live meanly like ants. Though the fable tells us that we were long ago changed into men, like pygmies we fight with cranes. It is error upon error, cloud upon cloud, and our best virtue has for its occasion a superfluous and evitable wretchedness." Now there's a period there, so I'm going to stop. As I read this one, I'm actually going to go ahead and just mark it as I go to try to save some time here. So he says, "Still we live meanly." I think that's an important word, and I'm looking at it in terms of what he said about mean in the last paragraph, and I don't think that's what he means. So I think he says meanly in terms of like, maybe like meagerly could work. So though the fable tells us, I'm actually going to circle fable, and I'm going to put a question mark here because that's confusing to me. The reason I circled it is because that word is important to me, not so much the idea. So I think it's interesting that he says in the first paragraph he refers to God, but now he's talking about fables. That's a little bit confusing to me. Maybe I'll make some sense of that later. So it is error upon error, cloud upon cloud, and our best virtue has for its occasion a superfluous and inevitable wretchedness. Now, superfluous and inevitable, actually it's defined for me down here. Unnecessary and avoidable. Okay, so our best virtue is from time to time unnecessary and avoidable wretchedness. Okay, I kind of think I think I agree with him there. So I'm actually gonna underline all of this because I agree, and I'm gonna put a little exclamation point there because I think that's an important point I want to touch on. Our life is frittered away by detail. An honest man has hardly need to count more than his 10 fingers, or in extreme cases, he may add his 10 toes and lump the rest. Simplicity, 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 I say. Now, this quote right here, simplicity, 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 a lot of students latched onto that, and they wrote it into their essays. But I got to tell you, that says nothing to me. It's him repeating, so we think it's important, but the reality is he's not saying anything. So I'm just going to keep skipping it. I say, let your affairs be as 2 or 3, and not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen, and keep your accounts on your thumbnail. Okay, so right here he's saying, and I'm going to do a quick little bracket over here because I don't think this is what the whole paragraph is about. He's saying, keep it simple, stupid, right? And I know I said simplicity, simplicity, simplicity is not saying anything, and it's still not. Even though he's still saying keep it simple, it's more important that he says count them as 2 or 3 and not 100 or 1,000, right? Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen. And keep your accounts on your thumbnail. This guy would hate our modern era because we have so much available to us. He would hate the internet, right? We're looking at an OG hipster here. So In the midst of this chopping sea of civilized life, such are the clouds and storms and quicksands and 1,001 items to be allowed for that man has to live. If he would not founder to go to the bottom and not make his port at all by dead reckoning, hold up. As I'm reading this, I'm starting to get lost. And not make his port at all by dead reckoning. That language doesn't make sense to me. So I'm going to put a question mark here. And I'm legitimately, that doesn't make sense to me. And I'm an English teacher, so that's kind of sad. And he must be a great calculator indeed who succeeds. Now, even though this thing that I underlined is unclear, this next part is kind of clear because he says he must be a great calculator indeed to succeed. And I know that he was just talking about counting things, right? So to be a great calculator who succeeds, he's again talking about keeping it simple. So maybe I wasn't so far off when I said that this could be my summary. Instead of 3 meals a day, if it be necessary, eat but one. Instead of 100 dishes, 5, and reduce other things in proportion. I want to know who's eating 100 dishes. That sounds stupid. Our life is like a German confederacy made up of petty states with its boundary forever fluctuating. Now, this is kind of critical here. Our life is made up of like a German confederacy. I can't talk. This is really interesting. And a lot of my students actually quoted this too, but I don't quite understand. I think what he might be saying is that the German confederacy made up of petty states, he's talking about, again, that sort of superfluous quality of our life. There's just too much going on, and so we're not quite getting it down, right? It's all external and superficial. These two words right here are going to be highly important for me. I think they're critical to my understanding. It's just such an unwieldy and overgrown establishment, cluttered with furniture and tripped up by its own traps, ruined by luxury and heedless expense. I'm going to underline luxury and heedless expense, right? Because that's unnecessary stuff. For it, stern and more than Spartan simplicity of life and elevation of purpose. It lives too fast. Men think that it is essential that the nation have commerce and export ice. You know what? I'm getting on here that Thoreau thinks this is simplicity. So over here, keeping up with my hashtag thing, I'm going to go simplicity, right? Because that's all that he's basically saying. He gives a lot more evidence, but frankly, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this already, and I want to make sure that I'm getting enough time to write. So I just know that this paragraph's about simplicity. So I'm going to go on and start pulling out some other facts here. So let us spend one day as deliberately as nature and not be thrown off by track by every nutshell and mosquito's wing that falls off the rails. Okay? Now, it's important to me that he says nutshell and mosquito's wings because these things don't matter. And I'm going to make myself a little note here. These things don't matter. They're insignificant, right? And it's very important that he does that. And actually, because I can use those words to kind of talk about the way that Thoreau feels, I'm going to actually put an exclamation point there because I think I can use that. Let us rise early and fast or break fast, gently without perturbation. Okay. Let company come and let company go. Let the bells ring and let the children cry, determined to make a day of it. Why should we knock under and go with this stream? Let us not be upset and overwhelmed in that terrible rapid and whirlpool called dinner. Dinner, situated in the Meridian Shallows. Meridian Shallows, that's interesting. I'm not quite sure what that means. Put a question mark. Whether this danger and you are safe for the rest of the way is downhill. With unrelaxed nerves, with morning vigor, sail by it looking another way. Tied to the mast like Ulysses. If the engine whistles, let it whistle till it's hoarse for its pains. If the bell rings, why should we run? We will consider what kind of music they are like. Let us settle ourselves and work and wedge our feet downward through the mud and slush of opinion and prejudice and tradition and delusion and appearance, that alluvion which covers the globe. That's very confusing. I'm looking here at this, and then down here at this. This just indicates paragraph 4, though, and that's a footnote. So let me see if I can come down here. The gradual action of water forming new land on a shore from natural or artificial causes. Interesting. Okay. Which covers the globe through Paris and London, through New York and Boston and Concord, through church and state. Here's another opposition, right? Church and state are separate things. Poetry and philosophy and religion, till we come to a hard bottom and rocks in place, which we can call reality and say, this is, and no mistake, and then begin having a point dipper. Wow, I really struggled with that. Below freshet and frost of fire. I don't know what that word says on my screen. A place where you might found a wall or state or set a lamp post safely, or perhaps a gauge, not a nilometer. Thoreau has a way of just rambling, right? So again, I kind of gave up on him in the last paragraph, and that's okay sometimes. If you need to give up on a reader, because we get the basic idea. He's saying, why waste your time? So we're going to go ahead and do this. Why waste your time? And ironically, we're going to stop wasting our time, because we have a basic idea of what Thoreau is saying. Time is but the stream I go a-fishing in. I drink at it, but while I drink I see the sandy bottom and detect how shallow it is. Its thin current slides away, but eternity remains. I would drink deeper, fish in the sky, whose bottom is pebbly with stars. I cannot count one. I know not the first letter of the alphabet. I have always been regretting that I was not as wise as the day I was born. The intellect is a cleaver. It discerns and rifts its way into the secret of things. I do not wish to be any more busy with my hands than is necessary. Okay, all that I just read was total garbage, except that last sentence. He says, I do not wish to be any more busy with my hands than is necessary. Don't get me wrong, Henry David Thoreau is a beautiful writer, but sometimes he just has nothing to say, right? And we need to know that as readers, it's okay for us to not like a text, right? I don't like this text. I think that Thoreau is being wishy-washy, and he's not really saying anything that's worth my time. So that aside, let's see what we can do to compare him to Mr. Bertrand Russell. So he says, my head is hands and feet. I feel all my best faculties concentrated in it. My instinct tells me that my head is an organ for burrowing, as some creatures use their snout and forepaws, and with it I would mine and burrow my way through these hills. I think that the richest vein is somewhere hereabouts. So by the divining rod and thin rising vapors I judge, and here I will begin to mine. So he's basically talking about how he wants to use his head to dig a hole. So you can tell I'm not super impressed with him. Basically, Thoreau is like very laid back, right? So he's like maybe a little more laid back than he should be. So I'm going to go right here. Thoreau is kind of laid back, right? That whole business about digging a hole with his head that could be metaphorical, really, I don't think it's that important. So I've got my text marked up here. You can see I've marked it all up, and I'm about ready to move on to the next text. So that took me a good little while, you can see, but in the long run, I think I'm going to make this work for me.